Hey everyone, it's Professor Nagel, and we are going to work through exercise 18-1, create the customer invoice application from Murach C#. So step 1 is to open the application, which I did that. Step 2 is add a list view control to the customer invoice form. So here's form customer invoice. And I need to add a list view, so I'm going to open my toolbox and pin it. And I want a list view, so we'll drop it in there. There we go. And we're going to name this thing anything. I'm sure we will later. Right now, I'm just going to call it LST invoices. That might change. We'll see when we get there. And set the view property of this control to details. All right, and then use the Smart Tag menu. So that's this little triangle up here in the upper right, and click on Edit Columns. Let me just see. Yeah, you can also just right-click and edit columns. That gets you there as well. And this displays the column header collection editor, and then define the column headings for this control so they appear like the columns shown in 1810. All right, and I'll just show you real quick. This is 1810. So we have customer, invoice ID, invoice date, invoice total. So I'm going to add, and then the text property for this first one is going to be customer. And you know, we could probably, I could probably set the width here like this, but I'm probably going to end up resizing them once I get in there. Add another one. This one is going to be invoice ID. Add another one, invoice date, and add one more, invoice total. And now let me see. I cannot resize these from here. That's a bummer. All right, go back to edit columns. Let's make these things bigger. So customer, I wish it told us like what values they want us to use here. We'll do 180, and then for invoice ID, that's not really a big one. We'll do 90. Same with invoice date. We just want to make sure that we can see the word invoice date. That's actually a little big. Could probably do 90 again on that one. And then same with invoice total. Could probably do 90. Yeah, we might have to make that one a little bit bigger. We'll go 120 with that. Okay, now there is some code on page 597 of the e-book, which is figure 1810. It gives you some code that shows you how this can like set the column width based on the DPI of your screen and all that stuff. I'm not going to get into that. I think we're good enough for now. Let's go back to the assignment. That's good. Hit save. We're going to look at invoice.cs. We're going to look at this business class, and we're done with the toolbox. We can hide that. So an invoice has an ID, a customer ID, a date, and an invoice total. That's what we're interested in. These three things here probably create the invoice total. And then invoice DB, you can see that it reads this invoices.txt. For my students, I moved invoices.txt in here. So these are the 41 invoices that we're going to be loading. Get invoices returns a list of invoices. All right, so that was step 4, is just look at those things. Step 5 is add a event handler to the load event of the form. So double click on the form. Make sure you're not double clicking on the list box. Double click on the form. So you're going to be on FRM customer invoices load. Then use get invoices method to get the list of invoices and store this in a variable. So we have a new variable called invoices. It is a list of invoice. So it's not a list of invoices. Invoice is the class that this is a list of. We're calling it invoices, and we're going to populate this by calling get invoices on the invoice DB class. And if you notice, the invoice DB class is static, so is get invoices, so we do not need to make an instance of this. We can just call it directly. That was step 5. So look, don't make comments like this. I'm doing this so you can just follow along if you're, jumping into the middle of the video like, oh, I've got a problem with step 7. You can see it in my code, all right? But step 5 is not a very good, useful comment in your own code. All right, so that's the first part of LINQ, is get the data. Remember, it's get the data, define a query, and execute. So next we need to define the query. And this is going to be our step 6. Actually, let's rename our list of invoices here to invoice list. Because what we're going to end up doing is having invoices is going to be the variable that we're going to be working on here. From invoice in invoice list, what do we want to do? We want to return all the invoices in the list and sorts them by invoice total in descending order. Order by invoice dot invoice total. We want to select, and let's see here. It says include a select clause in this query expression that selects entire invoices. So select invoice. So it's going to select everything. That was step 6. Step 7 is use a for each statement to execute the query and load the results into the list view. So for each invoice in invoices, and what we want to do is this invoice we want to add to this list, and this list box is LST invoices. So I'm going to say LST invoices dot items dot add, and what I'm going to add is invoice dot, and the first thing is going to be the customer ID, and we're making it a string. So save that. So yeah, I know this says customer and we want customer name eventually, but right now let's just add customer ID. And check this out. Okay, great. Those are my customer IDs for my list of invoices. So we did that. That worked great. So now we're going to add, what are we going to add next? The invoice ID. So LST invoices dot items dot add invoice dot invoice ID to string. All right, bear with me. We're going to run this again. And that's a customer ID, that's an invoice ID. That's a customer ID, that's an invoice ID. All right, we need to get the invoice ID over here though. So we can't just keep doing items add, items add. What we need to do is items add in order to add a new record to LST invoices. And then when we're dealing with the items, let's see if we can do this without using a variable. Because I think what we can do is we can say like int I, and let's call it like int this record is equal to LST invoices dot items dot count. So if I have nothing in there, I add something. Now the count is 1, but we're in line 0. So I want to take 1 away from that. Okay, so this is telling us what row we're on. Maybe we call it this row. This tells us what row we're on in our list box. Now instead of adding an item, what we want to do is in items at spot this row, we want to look at sub items and add the invoice ID. So let's check this out. There we go. Customer ID, invoice ID, customer ID, invoice ID. And it's automatically, this row is automatically incrementing. Now you could have just up here done like set this row equal to 0 and then right in here, this row plus plus. You could have done it that way. All right, I'm doing it this way because I don't know, because I wanted to. So we did the invoice ID, and now we need the invoice date and total. So let me make a copy of this. invoice, invoice date, and invoice total. Invoice total, because it's money, we're going to put the C there. And invoice date is a data object, so we're going to say toShort date string. Invoice ID is an int, so we're just going to use toString there. Run that one more time. Okay, we're good. Did we order by invoice total? Yeah. And let me just make sure that that's right. Invoice total in descending order. Oh, so we're backwards. Order by invoice total descending. And can I put this on multiple lines? Yeah, let's do that. All right, run it one more time. Biggest invoice at the top. We have a nice date. Customer invoice ID. Okay, I'm going to believe that that is correct. And don't worry about repeating customer IDs. Run the application. We did that. And then modify the select clause in the query expression so the query returns only the fields needed. So instead of selecting everything, we're going to select a new thing. And that's going to be invoice.invoice ID, invoice.customer ID, invoice.invoice date, and invoice.invoice total. Those are the only things that we use down here: customer ID, invoice ID, date, total. So those are the only things that we selected. And it still works. Okay, on to the next section of the same assignment. So we're still in 18.1. We've got our customer class, which is a name and an ID. And we have our database class with get customers, returns a list of customers. Nothing new there. But remember, our invoice class had a customer ID. So I know that invoice 106 is for customer 125. Right? And I can go into my customers record and I can find customer 125, Leslie Chrism, and that was their invoice. So what we want to do is, instead of showing the customer ID, show the customer's name. So back to in the load event at the top, up here is step 11, we have a new list. And this time it's a list of customers. This is going to be called customer list equals customer DB dot get customers. Now we have two lists, and our link can actually select from both lists at the same time. So from invoice and invoice list, we want to join customer in customer list on invoice.customer ID equals customer.customer ID. And when we can't use an equal sign there because we already have an equal sign here in this statement. So we have to write out the word equals. So this is how we are joining the customer data together. And we want to sort the results by invoice total within the customer name. So we want to order by customer.name and then invoice.invoice total descending. And what we're selecting is invoice ID, and then not invoice.customer ID, but customer.name. And just in the interest of columns here, our customer, invoice, ID, date, total, let's keep these the same order. So when your cursor's on a line, you can hold down Alt and hit down or up to move that line around. So now the thing I'm selecting, this anonymous class, the records in there are in the same order as my columns of my list box. And then I can't add customer ID, invoice.customer ID, but I can add invoice.name. So you might be thinking, wait, why is it invoice.name when it's really the customer name? Because invoices is the new result from my link query. I'm looping through these invoices and I'm calling that thing invoice, right? I could call this like customer invoice. So I can take this and say, this is customer invoice. So for each customer invoice and invoices, add the customer invoice.name, customer invoice.invoice ID, right? Maybe that's a little bit more descriptive because it's no longer just an invoice. All right, let's check this out. And yeah, there's the example right here, right? So first of all, our customers are sorted alphabetically, and Sarah Cumberland has 3 invoices, and those 3 invoices, 239, 172, and 64, are in descending order. All right, here we have Kathy. Oh, she's got 2 of the same. Allison, bunch of the same. Arthur Smith, 126.48, and then he has another one for 64.49. And in step 13, it does say, don't worry about not repeating the customer name. So the way we have it right now is fine. My students, some extra credit for you, don't repeat the customer name. All right, so when you run this, we have Alan Anderson and then Jeff Anderson and Randy Anderson. Those are all different people. But once you hit Sarah Chamberlain, you would show Sarah's name, but the next 2, you would just leave these empty. All right, but you'd still have all the other information, but you just wouldn't repeat the customer's name, and then you continue on. All right, so for some extra credit, do that. But otherwise, you are done with 18.1. Go ahead, zip, and submit this.